Think about the last time someone wronged you, really wronged you. Now think about whether they ever said sorry. For a lot of people, that second thought is a blank space. There's nothing there, no apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. And here's what's interesting. It's not always because they don't care. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. So what's actually happening inside the mind of someone who refuses to apologize, even when they know they should? Today, we're going to break that down, not from the outside looking in, not the they're just selfish version you've heard 100 times. We're going to look at the psychology, the real architecture of how these people think. And by the end, you're going to have 3 concrete strategies to actually deal with it. Let's be clear about what we're talking about here. This isn't about someone who forgot to say sorry about a small thing. We're not talking about the guy who bumped into you at the grocery store. We're talking about the people who consistently refuse to apologize, the partner who never admits fault, the coworker who throws you under the bus and doesn't even blink, the family member who rewrites history every single time there's a conflict. And if you've dealt with one of these people, you know the feeling. It's this strange combination of frustration and confusion because part of you thinks, how can someone be this aware of what they did and still refuse to own it? That question is exactly what we're answering today. And the answer is going to change the way you see this behavior completely. Here's what most people assume. They assume that apologizing is natural. Most humans, when they realize they've hurt someone, will come around eventually and say so. And for a lot of people, that's true. Most of us have an internal feedback loop. We do something wrong, we feel uncomfortable, we think about the other person, and we apologize. It's almost automatic. But here's the thing. That feedback loop doesn't work the same way for everyone. For some people, the discomfort doesn't point outward toward the person they hurt. It points inward toward themselves. And when the discomfort points inward, apologizing doesn't feel like repair. It feels like a threat. That distinction, outward versus inward, is the key to understanding everything we're going to talk about today. Most people look at someone who never apologizes and think they're arrogant, they're narcissistic, they just don't care about other people. And sometimes, sure, that's part of it, but here's what nobody talks about. For a huge number of these people, refusing to apologize is a survival strategy. It's not cruelty, it's self-protection. Think about it. For someone whose sense of self-worth is fragile, someone who has spent their whole life trying to avoid feeling inadequate, an apology is essentially an admission that they are exactly what they're terrified of being. Flawed, wrong, less than, so they don't apologize, not because the situation doesn't matter to them, but acknowledging it would crack something they've worked very hard to keep together. Does that make it okay? Absolutely not. But it does make it understandable. And understanding is exactly what gives you power over the situation. So let's get into the actual psychology. 3 things are happening under the hood, and they all work together. First, cognitive dissonance. This is the mental discomfort that happens when 2 beliefs conflict. If someone genuinely believes they are a good person and then they do something that hurts someone, those 2 things don't fit together. So the brain does what it always does. It resolves the conflict. But instead of changing how they see themselves, it changes how they see the situation. That person was being too sensitive. They provoked me. It wasn't that big a deal. The situation gets rewritten. And once it's rewritten, there's nothing to apologize for. Second, identity threat. For people whose self-image is tightly wound up in being competent, being in control, being the strong one, an apology directly challenges that identity. It's not just saying, I messed up. It's saying the version of myself I've built is not accurate, and that is terrifying. Third, learned behavior. A lot of these people grew up in environments where apologies were never modeled, where vulnerability was punished. Admitting fault meant losing power. They learned early on, don't apologize, it makes you weak. 3 mechanisms, 1 consistent outcome, and once you see all 3 working together, you can never unsee it. Now, understanding why someone does this is one thing, knowing what to do about it is another. Because here's the reality. You cannot force someone to apologize. You can't rewire their psychology in an afternoon. But what you can do is change how you navigate the situation so you're not the one stuck carrying all the weight. That's what the next part is about. 3 strategies, each one was built on a different principle. And all 3 of them work whether you're dealing with a partner, a coworker, or a family member. Strategy 1, calibrated confidence. Imagine a programmer who just pushed a bad update. The whole system crashed. Their manager is furious. But here's what this programmer does. They don't spiral, they don't get defensive, they pull up the logs, they look at the data. Not at all how they feel, not at all how their manager feels. They look at what actually happened. And once they see it clearly, they say, yeah, that was mine. Here's exactly what went wrong, and here's the fix. That's calibrated confidence. It's the ability to separate your self-worth from the situation and ground your response in something external. Something real, something you can actually point to. Here's how you use this in practice. When someone refuses to apologize, stop trying to get them to feel guilty. That's an internal lever, and you already know it's not connected. Instead, redirect the conversation to external evidence. What actually happened, what was said, what was the impact was. Keep it factual, keep it specific, keep it out of the emotional arena entirely. You're not trying to win an argument, you're trying to build a record that even they can't rewrite. Strategy 2, strategic humility. Picture a public speaker who just bombed on stage, forgot their lines, lost the audience halfway through, and the next day, instead of pretending it didn't happen, they post about it. That was rough. Here's what I learned. Here's how I'm going to do it differently. That's not a weakness, that's a move. It actually builds more trust than a perfect performance ever could. Strategic humility isn't about being a pushover. It's about being precise about what you're willing to own and what you're not. It's about drawing a line between the mistake and the person. When you're dealing with someone who won't apologize, try this. Acknowledge what you can. I understand this situation is complicated. I can see how that happened. You're not letting them off the hook. You're giving them an entry point. You're making it safe enough for them to take even a small step toward accountability. Most of the time, people who refuse to apologize are waiting for it to be safe. Strategic humility creates that safety without collapsing your own boundaries to do it. Strategy 3, systematic doubt capture. A therapist sits with a client who is convinced that everyone in their life is against them. And the therapist doesn't argue, doesn't say, no, that's not true. Instead, they say, write it down. Write down every time you feel that way. Write down what happened, what was said, what you felt. The act of writing it down, of externalizing it, changes everything, because suddenly the doubts aren't just noise in your head, they're on paper, and on paper you can actually look at them. Here's why this works for our situation. When someone refuses to apologize, they often do it because the whole thing stays in the messy, subjective space inside your head where they can easily say that's not how it happened, and you have nothing concrete to stand on. Systematic doubt capture flips that. You write down the incidents, the specific words, the specific actions, the specific dates. You externalize the uncertainty, and now it's no longer your word against theirs. It's a documented reality. This isn't about building a case, it's about giving yourself clarity, and clarity is power. So let's pull this all together. 3 strategies, 3 very different approaches, but they all rest on the same foundation. Calibrated confidence keeps you grounded in facts. Strategic humility creates the conditions for accountability, and systematic doubt capture gives you the evidence to trust your own experience. And here's the most important thing. None of these strategies requires the other person to change. They don't require an apology. They don't require anyone to suddenly become self-aware. They require you to shift how you're showing up in the situation. And that is the only lever you actually have control over. You can't make someone apologize. You can't make someone see what they've done, but you can stop being the only person in the room who's carrying the weight of it. And that shift for a lot of people is the real turning point. Now, if any of this hit close to home, I want to know about it. Drop a comment below. Tell me which of those 3 strategies you think you're going to try first. I read every single one, and if this video was useful, if it changed the way you're thinking about this, then hit subscribe. Because this is exactly the kind of psychology content I put out every week. The stuff nobody really talks about, the stuff that actually changes how you operate. Now, we just talked about the people who refuse to apologize, but here's a question I keep getting asked. What about the people on the other side, the ones who apologize too much, who say sorry for things that aren't even their fault? That's a whole different psychology, and honestly, it's just as interesting. I'm breaking that down in the next video, so if you don't want to miss that, make sure you've got notifications turned on. I'll see you in the next one.